This is Zero Signal, where security leaders stop waiting for certainty and start leading through it. I'm Conor Sherman.
And I'm Stuart Mitchell.
Let's get into it. Zero Signal is brought to you by Sysdig. Threat actors are compromising cloud accounts in under 8 minutes. Vulnerabilities are being exploited within 10 hours of disclosure. That's the defender's window, and it keeps closing. Attackers aren't waiting on dashboards. They go straight for what's running. Real time is the only timeline that matters. And that's why Forrester named Sysdig a leader in its latest wave for the cloud-native application protection platforms. Runtime is where real risk shows up, and runtime is what Sysdig is built for. So stop watching and start defending. Learn more at sysdig.com and check out the link in the description. Welcome back to Zero Signal. Today we have Crystal Morin. She's a senior cybersecurity strategist at Sysdig, a former Air Force intelligence analyst who has authored 4 of the 9 annual Sysdig cloud-native security and usage reports, the industry's primary source for real customer data on cloud-native security trends. Published on Sysdig.com, cited across Dark Reading, Security Magazine, SANS webinars, and more. And today we'll be diving into the hustle hard era is over. Vulnerability management is officially hitting the human ceiling, and the data proves that the next move is agentic. Crystal, thank you for coming to the show. All right, let's bust right into it. So your report opens with a pretty bold headline. The hustle hard era is over. And the data is showing that most organizations still have approximately 5.5% of workloads run critical or high vulnerabilities, a number that's essentially flat year over year, despite better tooling and more mature processes. So can you walk us through that? Why are we hitting this plateau? And what does the data look like from your side? Can you tell us what's happening underneath the surface and why we're hitting the ceiling?
Yeah, absolutely. So I get more and more excited about this report every single year. Like you said, this is the 4th time that I've written. This is the 9th report. So next year, if I'm around still, I'll make it halfway through usage report reporting. That's pretty exciting. And normally, I look at the data, we find a story, and we have this incredible path for the next year to follow through what security leaders need to do based on all of this information from our customers. This year, I finished going through the data, and I started looking at all of it, and me and the rest of the team, we were like, the story is already written. The incredible thing is that there's all of this information coming out from other parts of the industry too that say agentic AI is the way. So that's kind of how we first came to that line that the hustle hard era is over. It's not that security teams are falling behind. They're not doing anything wrong. They're just being outpaced. So that's where we got that premise from the storyline at the very top of the report. And that starts with vulnerability management. Like you said, this is the 4th time that we've reported on the number of critical and high vulnerabilities in use, meaning at runtime in production, and then also looking at the number of vulnerabilities that have a known exploit, so a proof of concept that will allow an attacker to get into a victim environment. And year after year, that number has gone down pretty consistently because of the use of runtime threat detection as a kind of guiding light for threat detection response. And then also prioritization. So for a few years now, that's also been a part of the vulnerability management story, is prioritizing the vulnerabilities that matter over the ones that don't matter. So if it's in production, that's going to be a little more significant and carry a little bit more weight and risk than something that's in a test environment that an attacker can't get to. So since last year, we have not seen the number of production vulnerabilities go down. That has stagnated. We did see some continued reduction, some more movement in the number of vulnerabilities with an exploit in production, which is a great thing. I think it was something like 74 or 75% reduction year over year. That number is now at like less than 0.2%. So that's really great because that's a huge aspect of risk summary is exploitable vulnerabilities at runtime. that number is continuing to go down. But overall, with Mythos and Project Glasswing, the number of vulnerabilities is just going to persist. And I don't see these percentages that we're looking at going down because the number of vulnerabilities that we're dealing with is just almost insurmountable at this point.
That's a good point. And the way I'm interpreting it and some of the data is that vulnerability management as we know it has hit pretty much a ceiling. It's plateaued a little bit, even though we get more people, we get better tools. We still can't break through. Like, what does a business case look like for an executive to greenlight or autonomous remediation, particularly in an environment where, like, this is historically seen as a very slow, very manual process?
So yeah, it generally has been human. We've seen the shift to automated ticket creation, automated prioritization like this. The ones with an exploit are more important than production, which are more important than test. That's all been automated and we can see it in front of us. But at this point, what do we do with that backlog of vulnerabilities? And this is the point in which we're saying it's time to bring in automation or agentic AI to be able to help you with that backlog because security analysts and detection engineers, our engineers cannot keep pace with the number of vulnerabilities that there are. I wish I could remember where I saw it, but there was recently a statistic. I want to say it was MITRE or CISA that said vulnerabilities have gone up like 200 or 300% just in the last several years.
I am sure that is true. We will go find the source and link it in the show notes, but like everything points to that. Like there's always been this, I've seen like 40 or 50% like increase year over year, 200 makes sense. Like just the sheer volume of discoveries of weaknesses in software vulnerabilities, it goes up year over year. It is a staggering amount.
Yes, it is. So to answer your question, Stu, like what can we do about this? Defining and applying guardrails. If you're deciding to implement agentic AI into your threat detection response or just remediation platform, taking the role of being able to define what that system is able to do. Is it a specific tag on the vulnerabilities that allows it to take it and go apply the patch? Or is it that it can only apply patches? Can it kill a container to be able to apply patches to something? Or is it a list of golden images that you have and you know that these are known good and your agentic system can then revert back to those? I think that's probably one of the first steps you could start to take.
You also had a pretty good insight in here too around image bloat coming down as well. I found as a practitioner encouragement seeing that tying into the. Could you expand on that concept and how these more streamlined images might play into a strategy towards dealing with a world where you can move to autonomous vulnerability remediation?
So the interesting thing with this image bloat statistic, I've looked at it again for a couple years, and it's still a very small percentage. This year, it's less than 1% of packages within images are unused. That's what image bloat is unused packages. You don't need them. You could take them out. Last year, so 2025 report from 24, those numbers had gone up, and we attributed that to the AI boom last year. Everybody was integrated AI into everything. So you're just ripping things off of GitHub and putting it into your environment. And there's a lot of stuff and bloat that you don't need when you're implementing open source projects into your own personal or enterprise environment. So that's what we warned in the 2025 report. This 26 report this year, we saw image bloat go down significantly. So I like to think that our call last year actually helped organizations realize that they need to revert back to SBOMs, look at what is in the images that you're using, take out things you don't need. If it doesn't pertain to your use case or to your environment, then just remove it. That's a huge cost savings because it doesn't cost as much to run all of these workloads. And it's just immediate risk reduction too. Yes, it could be a tedious process if you're doing it manually, but integrating Agentic into something like this, where you're reviewing SBOMs for images that don't need to be used in your particular environment, then you can cut back on costs and then also risk as well, because there's less of a chance of having vulnerabilities if your images are smaller.
I love that idea. Like, I don't know if that gets enough airtime that like the security leader can go to their peer, the CTO, be like, I can reduce your run rate costs by X% just by getting rid of the stuff in the images or in the operating systems you just don't need. We get the benefit of a hardened system. They get the benefit of less computation spend at runtime.
It's a really small part of the report, but it's definitely something worth reading because it benefits the whole organization. I think a lot of people don't pay enough attention to it. And maybe I'm wrong. It could be a favorite section of the report. I just haven't received that feedback.
Any chance I get to save money? I'm like, there we go. Security.
I don't think it'd be a favorite section at Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Cloud. I'm sure they don't like that part of the report.
That's true.
Crystal, one of the roles I know you do as well is you do a lot of publications on the work the threat research team is publishing out and come. So can you maybe tie these two ideas together for us? Like, we still see this world where you've kind of hit a plateau of 5% seems to be the number we can't break through with manual efforts. At the same time, we're seeing threat actors move very fast. Could you maybe help anchor us with a couple of examples of what the threat actor is doing, and what does that mean for a world where you've got this persistent critical vulnerabilities that are running in your production environment? Where's the risk happening here?
Vulnerability management, threat detection, and response, they kind of go hand in hand, because a handful of the threat research that you're going to see is initial access based on open vulnerabilities. And the team has been looking at some really interesting ones just in the last few months before this report launched. Exploitation getting faster. Threat actors are using AI to understand CVEs that are being published, and using it to help them write their proof of concepts, and then apply them to victim environments. Go scan the internet. There's several open source tools that you can use to do that, and then find your victims based on who is vulnerable to this new CVE. And these things are happening at a very quick capacity. There's one against LangChain that was exploited within 20 hours. There was another one against a Python notebook called Marimo, and that happened in less than 10 hours with no public exploits. We used to see these attacks against CVEs happening once a proof of concept was published, usually somewhere on GitHub. Some offensive or defensive player, it didn't matter which team they were on, but they would post something and say, this will allow you to exploit said vulnerability. Attackers don't need to look and wait for those anymore, because literally anyone, not just the skilled threat actors building proof of concepts, everybody has access to an LLM of some sort.
Right.
And they can use those to help them craft exploits and take advantage of these. 10 hours, I don't really know a lot of companies that are able to patch vulnerabilities that quickly right now. Again, speaking to the
It's like measured in the
manual.
single digits. Like, no, it's
That's a lot, because in the security seat, you see a vulnerability. Okay, let's see where in the environment it exists. What do we need to do to mitigate this? Is it a patch? Is it, like I said, a golden image? Figure out whose hands are in what buckets for this. And then you eventually do what you need to do to remediate that risk. That doesn't happen in 10 hours when you have umpteen people involved in the process.
I kind of want to, you mentioned this vulnerability ceiling that we're on. That's one side of it. And what is the business case? I want to kind of go back to that, what Stu was talking about, the business case for the autonomous remediation. Because when I start to think about this, you've got the vulnerability side. Then you've also got the identity side of this. And you can start to see how they're working together and starting chaining. So when I was thinking about reading through the report, I saw how you mentioned human accounts or identities accounted for 2.8% of all managed identities within these cloud service providers that you were looking at. Can you let us know what does that mean from your perspective? And let's also specifically talk about the risk profile of those identities as well, because there's a hell of a skew to there being more machine identities than there are human identities.
And honestly, this came as no surprise at all. With the rate at which we're scaling cloud environments and adding agents and API connections and all kinds of automated workflows, we're providing human level accesses to lots of different machines. So humans accounting for less than 3% of access to cloud service providers wasn't a shocker at all. I think that's the first time I've actually pulled that statistic to see what the weight was between the two. But what we have looked at for a few years over now, maybe 3, was the risk profiles. How do you define a human or machine risk? And then how risky are they? So, what percentage of these identities are maintaining some sort of risk? And we can dig into humans first. For that, it's if they have administrator privileges, no MFA enabled. That's still a problem, believe it or not.
Which is wild for 2026 that you're going to have privileged cloud accounts, no MFA.
Yes.
Because this was 67%, roughly 70% of the human-based identities are ones that are being flagged as risky.
Correct. Non-rotated access keys and inactivity for 90 plus days. A couple of years ago, we actually brought that inactivity up as an issue. You shouldn't have any kind of account still available and accessible if it hasn't been used within whatever your defined parameter is. We said 90 days. We'll deem that as risky. So a risky human account will have at least one, if not more, of these parameters that we've set. And I realize too that some of these identity risks could be false positives because administrator privileges, right? You have admins with admin privileges, but it's still significant to know that they exist, even if it is an actual person who deserves to be an admin because they're maintaining your infrastructure and backend. They're there, and if something happens to their account and you start seeing anomalous behavior working outside of business hours or from a different IP address, that risk profile still maintained, still should be there. So,
I mean, you say that, but the data set you guys pulled was what, 800,000 identities? So I'm not particularly worried about a false positive on that because that makes a lot of sense just instinctively to me. That the fact that you'd have these amount of machine identities in relation to human identities, and that these identities are still outside the norms of industry expectations. They're still being configured in a way where they have this inherent risk, where they haven't been rotated or don't have MFA.
How do you see those numbers trending into 27 and 28? Because this must have been a pretty dramatic increase, well, I guess decrease of human identities versus machine identities. Do you think we go 1%? Do you think we end up even going lower?
Man, I hope not. I think 3% is pretty low.
Yeah, agreed.
I would like to say that machine identity management should become a priority. Maybe we can get rid of some of those, like the image bloat, right? It exploded in 2025 because of the AI boom. So in 2026, maybe we can work on parsing down some of those machine identities. That's the thing. A handful of them, yes, there's API connections and AI agents, and everybody in your enterprise is using them, and that's why there's so many. But there's also a lot of these machine identities that are built for onboarding purposes or testing and training purposes. Once you're done onboarding, do you need those machine identities anymore? And those are privileged accounts. Probably not. Again, another case for an agentic system. Use that. What machine identities aren't being used, aren't needed anymore, are for temporary use cases, like I just stated, and start parsing those down and getting rid of them a little bit.
Yeah, who do you think within the enterprise organization, like traditionally this is an identity problem, which in of itself is always a challenge. Like we still don't really know where to put that, and it's varied in organizations. But as we think about this identity governance problem, and now as like non-human identity is the hot thing right now, Does that still fit in the CISO org? Is that a new category? Like, how do you think about this?
I could absolutely see it be a new category with how large it's gotten. You could absolutely have a single person managing something like identity management. But again, now we have these more modern innovations coming into play that we can use to kind of help facilitate. So it could stay under CISO or in some orgs CTO. But I bet Conor probably has an opinion on this. I could really see it going any direction. I just know that it's a problem, and that's where I land.
That's so off-brand for me to have an opinion on something as strong as that. Like, what are you talking about?
Where should don't give us a segue. Where do you sit? Let's get a bold take.
Organizational structures. Here's my take. You design an org for the outcomes you're looking for, and so what you need to do is you start to say, if 3% of your identities are human and 97% are machine, then you need to put the responsibility with who's creating the risk. That's right about. So I've always been a fan of, like, if you're going to go mess with the knobs and dials and introduce all this risk, well, you get to be the one at 3:00 in the morning who's going to respond when it goes boom. So there's a world where you start to think along those lines. So I think it's going to depend, because I was a consultant. So it'll depend. But I like the way we're talking about this. Is like, you're right, Stu. It is a massive, messy problem, which right now we don't have clear industry. Conor, my perspective is, don't have clear industry insight on how to manage this kind of thing. And it's just an incredible amount of risk is coming along for the ride. And it's not one of those things that you can deal with later, because every time they build an agent, every time we do a machine connection, how we do another set of identities is coming up. So it's like identity is a now problem, to your point, Crystal.
We weren't even good at this with humans. Like, to your point, there are still businesses who don't have MFA. If we look back 5 years ago, we had it so good as security leaders. Like, all we had to do was secure the human piece, and like, we weren't any good. So this is just going to be a real challenge, and one that we definitely need to get equipped for.
Okay, I'm going to throw a curveball real quick too while we're still on this identity problem. So 3% are humans, 97% are machines. The risk profile for these human identities is 67%. And we know there's a lot of industry reporting that says humans are accounting for a lot of breaches, right? Social engineering, it's, all of the reports anywhere from, like, say 50 to 70%.
I think the IEM data breach has humans being a cause. The reason, like, that 60% mark, I think, if I remember correctly.
That's roughly about what everybody is. It depends on what threats they look at, and whatever. More than 50%, let's say, are caused by humans. Now, machine identities are the majority of our identity management programs now, vast majority. And the report breaks out risk for machine identities by cloud service provider and by type of machine. So the three major providers, we looked at AWS, GCP, and Azure. They have roles, they have policies, they have service identities. They're all defined in the report, and they all have a slightly different risk profile for machines.
Oh.
But they're all between, like, 34 and 48%. So we are actually doing a decent job at securing these machine identities. It's less than 50% risk profile. So
that's kind of interesting. So you're saying, like, don't worry, it's getting better because we're increasing the denominator. There's more identities and they're more secure. So therefore, as a percentage, they go through. I'm like, all right, I can see how that works itself out in the math.
It's confusing. So 3% are accounting for more than 50% of the breaches. 97% are all of the identities, but we're actually doing a good job managing them. That's not to say that breaches aren't happening because of machine identity infiltration, usage, abuse, whatever. But we're doing a better job securing machine identities.
All right. Well, I've got a question for you then, Crystal. Does it count as a machine identity or a human identity if I take my OAuth tokens and hand them to my OpenClaw and then say, have at it? Where does that land on the spectrum?
I highly suggest not giving your personal tokens or any information like that to an agent. It should have its own.
You have to live a little.
Yes.
Zero Signal is brought to you by Hampton North. I've been responsible for building and turning around cybersecurity programs for companies where a lapse in security just isn't an option. Finance, high tech, AI. Different domains, but the same truth. The programs live and die on talent. And no strategy ships without the right people who share the right DNA. That's why I partner with Hampton North. I've built 3 cybersecurity teams with them, and every time they move faster than anyone else without sacrificing quality. While other agencies are still pushing paperwork, Hampton North already had vetted candidates in front of me. Their executive search is not one size fits all. With one of the largest networks of security leaders in the US, their leadership roles hit the market in days, sometimes hours. And their go-to-market practice covers CROs, CMOs, revenue leaders, and full team build-outs for scaling cybersecurity businesses. They meet every candidate, they reference every story. If you're ready to build and scale and grow your security program, go to hamptonnorth.com and see why brands like Clear, Instacart, Airtable, and OpenAI trust Hampton North to build great teams. Check out the link in the description. All right, so I actually want to switch over to the companies who are adopting AI, because this I found very interesting. I was looking at that. So there's a finding in the report that will be a surprise to a lot of our audience. It certainly was a surprise to me that more than 50% of the AI and machine learning packages in production cloud environments actually belong to European organizations. And EMEA was at like 52% versus 33% in the Americas and 19% in Asia Pac. For me, the conventional narrative has been that like regulation is going to be the one that's slowing down innovation. It kind of points to the data saying something different. What's your take on what's going on in EMEA? What's your take on why we're seeing this growth and innovation happening there with machine learning and AI in these cloud production workloads?
So this was probably the biggest surprise to me when I started going through the data, because I assumed that EMEA, Europe wouldn't necessarily be lower than the Americas, but about the same, right? So these are 2 parts of the world that have lots of cloud native type organizations. They prioritize innovation and technology quite a bit. And when you look at it, brass tacks, EMEA has a lot more regulations with data sovereignty and AI governance and everything than
The
America.
EU AI Act being chief amongst them.
Exactly. And they have the cloud data sovereignty seal 4. They have that framework as well that they can rely on. So I thought that they would at least be close, not a 20% difference. So this data says that European organizations have more AI and machine learning at the package level. I did not look at who's using AI, APIs, third-party vendor tools, SaaS, things like that. So if we added that in, then yeah, maybe they'd be about the same, or America would be higher. I definitely expect APAC to be higher there as well. But they're integrating more at the package level, which tells me that these regulations are actually helping them build. I would assume building securely based on what all of these regs say. They tell you what kind of identity management and threat detection and
It'll be a first if a compliance regime translated to someone actually doing something more securely, but I can be fooled. I can be.
but it's all there in the words. So
Listen, maybe that assumed protection makes people feel more confident, right? Like in the same way that when you drive a car faster because the brakes are there and the seatbelts are there, like you can still die with a seatbelt, but you drive faster, right? Like that's the reality. And I wonder if these assumed layers of compliance, because there's still plenty of people that are trigger happy to use AI because they just don't know what they're doing. And these guardrails may just make businesses feel more comfortable. And look, I would not have placed a wager on, and again, this is obviously limited data, but like you assume that the US just rips ahead because nothing's slowing them down. So perhaps creating these environments, and this can be a lesson for the enterprise, right? Like if you can create an environment that's enterprise friendly because you are adhering to guidelines, and it doesn't necessarily mean everything from a safety perspective, as Conor says, but this assumed safetiness may drive innovation, which maybe Europe were right that this was the way to play it.
This has been said for many different things, but just the box checking. So you meet all of the things in the EU AI Act, so you can check all the boxes and you are therefore secure in your AI usage. So let's adopt all of the things and put it into all of the production. That could be a possibility. I actually included a graphic in the report from another company, Harness AI.
We are friends. Adam Aurelio, guest of the pod, friends of the pod. Yes, he's over at
All right,
Harness.
well, you'll have to send this his way. I included a graphic from them in here because it does actually show also the third-party usage of AI, which overall is larger than, the internal package level type integration. So I just wanted to highlight, I didn't bring that into our report from a Sysdig perspective, but their information kind of fits right along with what I expected.
Maybe that helps them explain what you were describing in the report as well. You brought in this framework from McKinsey around AI adoption. I want you to expound on, because I thought that was really helpful in understanding how enterprises are using AI. You talk about the makers, the takers, and the shapers. Could you define those terms and then just explain how this might give color to what we're seeing in the data?
This framework from McKinsey was actually handed to me by another employee at Sysdig who's been working on all kinds of AI initiatives. And when he gave this to me and I paired it with what the data said, it just made so much sense that I needed to work it in here. Takers are the ones consuming AI through third party products, SaaS that's layered on top of something, or going and using hosted models, ChatGPT, Claude. It's integrated into Snowflake for your sales and customer data, right? The shapers are the ones who are taking models like OpenAI or something from Hugging Face that has a base level, and then they're throwing on top of it their own data pipelines and kind of customizing something that already exists. And then finally, the makers are the ones who are building AI models from scratch. Um, and it's probably a very low percentage. I would think that right now, most organizations are in that shaper realm, but the takers are using an insane amount of GPU, tons of data thrown into the model, and they're customizing it and making it completely their own. It's stored in house, it's not internet facing, I hope. And that's kind of the difference between the makers and the shapers.
And one of the things that you'd met in the McKinsey report is there's characteristics of different types of organizations, like B2C organizations were more in that shaper category. Those B2B orgs, like very much like the takers using those third party platforms. Why do you think that is?
AI adoption at the package level by business sector. There's a graph in the report that shows exactly which ones and how many there are. So, media and internet was one of the top users, transportation, retail, etc., and it goes down. So, when I saw this information, I was trying to figure out how to present it. What does this mean? And you can kind of see that there's B2C or business to consumer organizations kind of more toward the top of that list. And then the B2B software businesses, the ones that are selling directly to other businesses, manufacturing companies, that are further toward the bottom. So there's a little less internal AI usage there. So why is that? I think it has to do with the business model for these types of organizations. You have to look at who they're selling to. Media and internet or transportation company, if they're selling directly to end users like us, they're trying to implement AI capabilities as quickly as possible because it makes consumers' lives faster, easier, not having to call a call center when you can just use a little chat bot instead. And the business to business, I think, are more intentional. Their usage of AI is for internal productivity. They don't necessarily have to sell anything to an end user. So it doesn't need to be as pretty or as obvious. I will caveat real quick. Again, this doesn't include the third-party usage. So adding in something from a Chat GPT or Claude SaaS capability into their website, not included here. This is just internal usage of AI.
Which is kind of interesting, which I can start to see how this all works together with, like, if you've got the EUA Act with a data sovereignty, you want more of it on-premise, you want more of it in your controlled cloud environment, you're more likely to go grab libraries and SDKs and models and run them inside either on-premise or in your sovereign cloud environment, leading to less consumption of public APIs facing from major frontier models, running it more locally, and then that's where the adoption comes in. That I can see how this comes together. But it's interesting, like when you start looking at the data, and then you find the narrative, you're like, now it makes sense. Versus trying to like start with a narrative and then figure out the data.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. It just, I throw it on the paper and it speaks to me and others, not just me, but
both you and Mike Prevet, who in front of the podcast, he's a cyber economist. You guys have that in common. It's just like, give me a spreadsheet all day long. I just want the data. Like,
it comes from my background. It's what I do.
Yes. I want to move over to something that's very near and dear to my heart that I was super excited to see in the report. I'm glad we have a world that's heading in this way. So let me grab something here. I really want to get your take on this on-ramp to agentic defense, because this for me was a very key finding that came out of the report that you're looking at. When I was looking at the stats in your report, stat in your report that I kept coming back to was that there was a 140% increase in organizations killing processes, that classic kill 9 command, that would autonomously and programmatically terminate a process when it was deemed to be malicious or suspicious. Now, what I thought was interesting was the rate of increase from previous years, and I'd love to get your perspective on what your thought there is. And then where do you think this is going over the next, let's call it 3 years? Like we look out into the future and we start to see more. Where do you see the puck going when it comes to where do you see the puck going as we start to move towards agentic defense?
So this capability within Sysdig for our customers to kill a process, seeing that massive growth over the last year is phenomenal. In my opinion, there's still not enough customers using it yet, even though the growth is fairly exponential at 140%. But killing a process is a very low level, low blast radius capability. We've also been tracking other types of autonomous response over the last few years for killing a container or even just pausing or stopping it if something malicious is happening, or blocking drift or malware from happening. Those are larger containment capabilities, or I mean, that last one, blocking drift, could be a very big and serious prevention capability. If it's intentional drift, then you could shut something down by accident.
Well, if it's intentional drift, I go slap the wrists of my engineers, say, put it through the pipeline. Like go back to your CI/CD pipeline, commit to code, go through the process.
So overall, there's still been over the last 3 years or so a lot of hesitancy in using autonomous reactions, but there's been some consistent increase in usage over the last few years as well. I think over the next 3 years, it's going to continue to grow exponentially. I think we have enough of the technology and knowledge to be able to start trusting these capabilities. It was scary a few years ago when you're like, I could shut down all of my operations if I kill this container because something happened in it, because it's running a critical infrastructure and we kill this and then everything stops and the whole website comes down or trucks stop moving. I don't think we're at that point anymore.
Well, God hopes that we'd like baked in some resiliency in our architecture. I mean, what, AWS
Exactly.
Chaos Monkey's been out for 16 years, something like that. It's like 14 years.
We as an industry understand what happens when you implement these capabilities. And I think we're at the point, especially in the next 3 years, where everyone should be using autonomous actions for at least some events, whether it's particular detections, like drift or malware or crypto miners, you can just kill a crypto miner, just stop it or contain it. They can be easily enough picked up with stateful or behavioral detections, or even still IOC-based detections for crypto miners, that you can stop this from happening because, like you said, CISOs care about money, the executives care about money, all of them. Stop the crypto miners from using your resources, and even LLMs, because they steal those resources now too, and you can save yourself thousands of dollars per day, month, and year.
Could you expand on that? What do you mean by threat actors stealing those resources in this capacity?
So crypto mining, being able to use your CPUs, right? That's been a thing for, God, I don't even know how long. Decades, multiple decades.
Since Bitcoin was cool. Since then.
As far as stealing resources from LLMs, that's something we've seen more recently. In 2024, Sysdig's threat research team first reported on it. It's called LLM jacking. And it's literally the same as crypto jacking, crypto mining. An attacker gains access to your environment. They can do a scan and run some scripts to see what chat bots you're using. Literally any of them. Claude, GPT, all of the open source ones. Run a script. What kind of AI does this enterprise have access to? And they can gain access to those LLMs and use them themselves for literally anything they want. We've seen some PG-13 type use cases. We've seen them trying to write malware. We've seen them doing college homework, like writing essays for them, but they don't have to pay for the tokens when they've gone into a victim environment, and they can just use your LLM instead.
Chipotle was the public one, right? They found a way to use, like they were using all of Chipotle's Claude credits by speaking to the chatbot and configuring it so that they could essentially do what we do, but not have to pay for it. That was the one that I saw publicly.
I haven't seen that story.
I didn't know about that, but
they were just talking to Chipotle's chatbot. Essentially, I think there was basically a override message, and then you could treat it like Claude Opus, and people were doing it.
See, so that's not even like getting into the victim environment. They're literally just using the external facing chatbot and doing it.
Yep.
But this can cost you potentially like tens of thousands of dollars in just a single month if somebody is maliciously using your LLM capability. And they're being sold now too. So at first it was kind of like little dabbles of people testing what can I get away with. And now if they find credentials, because everybody steals credentials, they see what the credentials or what these keys, access keys, are able to reach, and they sell them on the dark web. And now I have a key for an environment, and they have this LLM, and I will sell it to you for X amount of dollars. And there's a little black market going on for this stuff too.
Do you think the Anthropic, OpenAI, motivated to do much about this, given it means that they can sell compute? Like, I guess in an ideal world, we'd like to think that they should put a stop to this, but there's not a huge amount of incentive for them to slow down on this or put secondary layers of access controls in, like, for them as a business.
Yeah, I mean, for them on the business side of thing, it's, well, you are the one in charge of securing your access to this, so you're SOL.
Yeah, it's not Rolex's fault if someone steals my stolen watch, right? It's not their problem.
And actually, Stu, to that point, Anthropic is now pushing clarity around a shared responsibilities model around AI. And that's going to become the next conversation. The next round of podcasts will be about that, I'm sure.
So when we first reported about LLM jacking almost 2 years ago now, that summer following, we actually found a personal victim on X who said that his CSP was hacked into. They stole access to an LLM that he was hosting in AWS, and they racked up a bill of $6,000-$7,000, maybe more, within just a couple of hours. I'm pretty sure it was while he was sleeping. And he reached out to AWS and said, this wasn't me, and kind of explained the whole situation. We have a bunch of screenshots from all of these posts on X that there were, and it wasn't an enterprise. This was an individual who was using AWS, I think, for his email. And it was like a $6,000 or $7,000 bill in less than a day.
So technically, we call that a nightmare. Yeah, that's pretty terrible. So, Crystal, as we start to wrap here, I want to get two thoughts from you in a second.
Mhm.
You mentioned in the report about when you look at the data of how people are doing response actions right now, they're using you're seeing you had a 140% increase of the kill the process. But you mentioned earlier that you can kill a process, you can kill a container, you can quarantine a container, take forensic snapshots, you can do drift control. There's a ladder where you're getting progressively safer by having more and more agentic, programmatic, defensive responses. What do you think it's going to take for an industry to shift from like a 30% adoption at the process level up to the chain on that ladder so that we're seeing more improvement and systems doing more autonomous defense?
I wish I knew the answer to that. Honestly, it's just overcoming the hesitancy and concern and just putting the trust further away from you. And actually, honestly, like these autonomous actions don't even have to be run by an agent. You can literally just script these to happen. So, what AI used to be like use machine learning scripts and just script something. So if this happens, then you do this. You don't have to use agents so it doesn't continue killing things or move things around or anything like that. This can be very basic. Now I think we could and should get to that point where it's more hands off. But the point that this is at right now in the report is this is still very much so managed by humans, and this autonomous action takes place. And now you can go look at it. Everything is contained. And now you can still do a manual assessment of what happened.
And look, as we wind down here, talked earlier on about you hitting the fifth report, getting that 50% number. Let's talk about the 2027 report and we're 4 months into the year, like what you expect to see. And I think let's talk about like one thing you think is going to get better that you've identified in the report, one thing that you think we might get worse, and then one potential new or bold take that we're not even thinking about yet.
This report is still newly relaunched, but I already have my eyes set on next year. I was actually talking to a few folks just in the last couple of days about what I want to do with the 2027 report because it's our 10th report, so it's a big deal. I want to look at how AI has truly changed the cloud native landscape over the last several years. And I have a lot of ideas on how we're going to go about doing that. I'm a little scared to see the differences between years ago and next year, but I expect there to be more information about speed. I'm excited to see the change in scale over the last several years of how cloud native environments have changed size wise, like we've seen with identities. I'm hopeful that the threat detection and response will really take off. It's been slow moving over the last couple years, but coming from the Intel background, that's my pride and joy is threat detection and response. So that's where I really want us as an industry to win. And as far as what's going to get worse, it's a great question. Maybe we're going to, I don't know if this is worse, but we're just going to give up on cloud and go back to on-prem and everything is hosted yourself and we'll just have stacks of servers, and that would be unfortunate, but I could see it happening.
As a guy who spent his early career racking those things, they're heavy. No, thank you. Well, Crystal, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Crystal Morin is the Senior Cybersecurity Strategist at Sysdig, a former Air Force intelligence analyst, and the author of the fourth of the 9 annual Sysdig Cloud Native Security and Usage Reports, an industry The report that's focused primarily using on real customer data for cloud native trends, published on Sysdig.com. It's cited across Dark Reading, Security Magazine, SANS webcasts. Follow Crystal on LinkedIn for some really great insights, and make sure to follow her work on the Sysdig Threat Research team when they put out incredible publications. Crystal, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
If today's conversation gave you something useful, a framework, a question worth sitting with, a way to position something you're already dealing with, that's the point. Connect with Conor and I on LinkedIn. The links are in the show notes. Tell us what landed.
And if you know another security leader who's navigating the same pressure, text them this episode. We'll see you next time.
Resonate.